At what age or grade do you have the conversation about sex with your child? Does the age differ for sons and daughters? Is the conversation different for daughters versus sons? We will talk about that and much more. Stay tuned to the Brothers in Fatherhood podcast. Welcome to Brothers in Fatherhood, the show that is by Black fathers for Black fathers. I'm Apollo. Our podcast is designed to be an inclusive community where fathers from different backgrounds come together and share their opinions and their experience so we can grow and evolve as better men to help raise the future generation, our kids. That's why we have plenty of rotating hosts and guests to provide different views and perspectives of Black fathers as well as sons. This allows us to discuss a topic from several angles. We challenge one another, which sometimes turns into friendly arguments, but at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, just to grow this platform to help as many brothers as we can. Knowledge is power. By sharing our dad experience and wisdom, we can move the culture forward. Each episode, we will tackle a specific subject that we encounter as fathers and discuss questions that our kids might have asked us. Nothing is off limits. Today, we're talking about at what age or grade do you have the conversation about sex with your children? Does it differ between sons and daughters? Is the conversation different for sons and daughters? We'll talk about that. Joining us today, we have Joe, Mike, and Alfred. So brothers, let's talk about this. What is the most appropriate age to have the conversation about sex with your children?
The way I view this subject, you should have the conversation about the birds and bees at a pretty young age, because that's usually when the questions fly. So the questions fly, at least for my boys. My oldest, it came around 4 or 5. The youngest, it came at 3. How are babies made? So that's the birds and the bee question. You talk about the difference in between boys and girls. How I view it, you have that birds and bee conversation early on, and you're solidifying that with your youngsters so that they know at a pretty young age what separates them from their friends if they have little girlfriends and boyfriends. So when they go to school, they know the difference. And then later on, right before their hormones and everything start flaring up, like now my oldest is about to turn 11, I could definitely see him coming into middle school, the hormones flaring. I want to beat it to the punch and have that conversation. Haven't had it yet, but have that conversation about sex, and then talk about the appropriateness of having sex, abstinence and virginity, STDs, having that actual conversation about sex later on, before his stage, when his hormones start flaring up and he starts noticing females a lot more. What do you think?
I think if you when you compare to my son is also turning 11 in about 2.5 weeks. I was forced to have that conversation with him and the rest of my 3 other kids because they are already teaching that in the 4th grade. And that particular topic was not discussed with parents prior. So it was a conversation. It was an actual topic that they discussed in their 4th grade class. Then my son came back to me and my wife and was like, "What's this? What's that?" So clearly, as a parent, where the hell did you get that from? Because it wasn't something that they said, FYI, we're getting ready to talk about sex in a 4th grade class. So I'll be honest with you, though, it wasn't as hard because the way they're explaining it is more like textbooks. So they were both kind of like asking simple, basic questions to where when I was able to give them those answers, it wasn't that talk that you would normally have with someone who's, let's say, 13 years old, already in middle school. So what I did is I just kind of had that conversation with all 4, but I put it in a way to where giving you the basics, but not too much. And then I told them as they get older, I'll be able to kind of conversate with you so that you completely understand it. A 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and even a 9-year-old, they don't fully understand it. But I knew that my oldest at some point, because he does watch rated R movies here and there with us, when some of the movies that we're watching, we don't even know that a particular sex scene is actually getting ready to come on. You know what I mean? So it made it easier for me to be like, you see what they're doing right now? Okay, this is, a part of this, and then I can explain it. But I'm not in my mind, because he's a boy, I'm not kind of telling myself, well, this is something that you need to be doing in the next, 2 years, that kind of thing. So I think it's different for every parent, but definitely from my perspective, I was kind of forced into it because I didn't realize that school was actually teaching this or talking about this in the 4th grade.
I'm not tracking that. My son got that lesson in the 4th grade. But as far as I'm aware of, the school hasn't forced my hand yet. So I think I'm still clear, but we did have the birds and the bee conversation with both boys. My oldest and my youngest, the youngest being 9, and my youngest being a little fast tail. I had to have the conversation a lot earlier. Matter of fact, yeah. Oh, Mike knows.
Oh man.
Oh God. But yeah, true story. Real quick. Youngest one, I don't know where he got it from. I'm ashamed. And it could have got real bad if Mike and Candace, Mike's wife, would have pressed any type of issues. But long story short, Mike's daughter is oldest, and my youngest son, around the same age. My youngest son is a little bit older, and at the Pro Bowl tailgate party, one of those years when we're both out there in Hawaii together, my youngest son kissed his daughter around, what were they, 2, 3, 2?
Yeah, 2. I almost pulled my gun out. Shoot.
and we saw it happening. Like, me and him both saw it happen. Like,
it's like, the heck? Your son about to die today. Come on now. Too young for that.
He did. I mean, obviously, he didn't know what he was doing. I thought he didn't know what he was doing. It wasn't an isolated incident. It happened to 2 other little girls. So before he was even 5, that happened 3 times. So I had to have the conversation a lot earlier with him. Like, hey, I don't know where you're getting it from. It's not like me and the wife have a lot of public displays of affection, that type of thing. I had to sit him down early and say, hey, this is not appropriate, yada, yada, that. But it could have escalated, especially if Mike and Candace were like, hey, he just sexually assaulted my daughter. Stranger things have happened, you know what I mean?
True.
Especially through the last few years. So, but yeah, I was forced to have that conversation at 2.5, wherever he was at the time where he kissed his daughter. But normally, the birds and the bees conversation I had with my boys around 4 or 5. With Adonis, my youngest, had to have it a lot earlier. And then the whole sex conversation, what you were saying, Joe, you haven't had it in depth yet. You haven't had the penis goes in the vagina, that type of thing yet. Right?
See, but yet that's correct. Not yet. Well, yes, to an extent, but you got to keep in mind too. One thing I forgot to add to my story is when they had this conversation in their 4th grade class, they had to have the overall conversation of men and women, men and men, women and women. This is San Francisco. So the school that they go to is extremely open and very transparent on what they do. So there's a lot of same sex marriages, women marrying women, men marrying men. There are boys who actually are at that school who wear tutus, who categorize themselves as girls. There are girls who categorize themselves as boys. And this is as early as probably the 1st, 2nd grade. So you got to keep in mind the environment that my kids are currently in, that's open, and you must respect all of that. Even though I'm not familiar with that, I had to actually get familiar with it and comfortable with it quick. Would I say that I'm very comfortable with it? Absolutely not, because I didn't grow up around that. But I have been in San Francisco for about 10 years now, so I see it so much that it has become the norm and it's accepted. But that conversation about having, a conversation between other than just a man and women, I'm not ready to have that particular conversation no time soon. But they see it. They see some of their friends that have two dads. They see some of their friends that have two moms. So at some point, because I know that this school is a close and tight-knit school, I'm going to have that conversation with them. I just don't know how I'm going to explain that, with the two men. That's going to be very interesting to talk about. I'm not going to be comfortable, but I'm probably going to have to, figure out a way to make it serious, but, not saying like I'm joking to try to offend nobody, but that ain't me. You know what I mean? So it's going to come to, and I'm not trying to bash nobody that's just like that. It's just that I didn't grow up around that. I grew up in a small town. So this was something that I had to see as I got into my late 20s and 30s. Now that I'm here, it's accepted. I get it. I have friends, all that stuff. So I'm not bashing that community or whatsoever, but I don't know how to have that conversation with my kids. You know what I mean? And I think some people, depending on where you live at, they won't ever have that conversation with their kids, and that's okay. But you got to, I guess it depends on where you living. You know what I mean? Where you living at. If you're in LA, if you're in San Francisco and it's the norm, even in Georgia, some parts of Georgia, for Atlanta, for example, it's pretty damn popular out there. You know what I mean? So, but you can be somewhere in Carolina or Hawaii or somewhere around there where you don't see it as much. You may not have a conversation, but I'm going to have a long general conversation about all of that. And right now, I'll be honest with you, at the fourth grade, I'm just not ready for that. So I would say closer to middle school to where I could be a little more comfortable having it. But in the fourth grade, I think to me, it's just too early.
You can't have the sex conversation without having the whole inclusive conversation about sexual identities, how certain people identify themselves, and then heterosexual, homosexual, then you have the transgender. So there's a whole larger conversation I believe you have to have. We started down that road with my oldest because he'll ask the question. He is very bold. He'll ask the question if he sees something like, "Hey, what's going on over there?" So he's asked about the male on male and female on female because he sees it. We have friends in Atlanta, and we're only like an hour and some change away from Atlanta. So we go up there. He saw something. He asked a question, and then we had to explain without getting very graphic or all into the weeds. Asking and said, well, certain people like other people, no matter what sex they are, they're just like the same sex sometimes. They're attracted to the people. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. So kind of left it at that. He didn't ask any more questions. So I just said, all right, he's cool. All right. I'm on thin ice at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty similar to the conversation I had. I mean, one of my sons said, "Why does my friend have two dads?" And it was something I really had to sit around and think about. I couldn't answer that in a split second, because I wanted to make sure I gave enough information so that he understood it, but not as much to where I had to keep explaining it, if that makes sense. But also I didn't want to offend. Like, let's say if my son went back and repeated something to his friend, which then got back to the dad, I didn't want that. So I had to be very careful on what I said and how I said it. So I kind of kept it simple. But at that point, none of my kids have actually asked anything about that. They talk about it every single day about acceptance, no matter how you come to that particular school, that they've now kind of like embedded it into their mind that it's okay. And that's how they perceive it. So people come in. So roughly about 300 kids, one small school, and they share pretty much everything. So it's a small community, you know what I mean? So you say something to somebody like that, it's going to get out. It's like a little small town where, that bad news is going to get out quick, and then you become the outcast. And then, quite frankly, if they see that you're not a good fit for the school, they'll dismiss you.
Wow.
You know, it's a private school. It's a nonprofit. It's one of the top schools in San Francisco, one of the top in the Bay Area. It's hard to get in. We actually got denied a couple of times. But once you kind of get in, you become a family, and it's super close niche. Everybody goes to these really nice high schools and colleges afterwards because of their curriculum and all that stuff, yada, yada. But it is a really, really tight knit school. And there's a lot of everyone. There's a lot of, let's say, lower middle class people. There's a lot of higher class people. And then there's like that in between to where you're like an upper middle as well. But everyone comes in and everyone's treated the same, no matter your race, no matter any of that. So knowing that, I haven't touched on it as much as I want to, but I think honestly, just talking to you guys will give me more of a better way to kind of actually approach it. You know what I mean? To come in, like, damn, I need to take this idea away, because we all live in different cities. Everything is different. So the way Mike is going to tell his daughter about this particular topic is going to be completely different than how I'm going to tell my son, but it's probably going to be the same way I'm going to tell my son, Apollo, because my son and your son are around this. They're almost the exact same age. So even though you're in Georgia, there's still that particular conversation that we're probably going to have. But Mike has a daughter. So those words are going to be different. They're going to be extremely different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to depend on if it's a boy or a girl. And then you kind of going to have to tailor everything down, and you may have to have multiple conversations with your daughter. Because they're more at risk, you know what I mean, than the boy. So, you know, your conversation might go on for your life.
Lord knows, boy.
What do you mean?
I ain't ready.
Joe, what was the conversation that you did say to them? Like, what was that conversation for people listening so they understand what was that conversation you had with them when you said, why did my friend have two dads? What did that conversation look like?
So it basically looked similar to this. That what happened was my son wanted to go on a play date, and this is my third grader, and he noticed that the dad picked him up. He didn't pay too much attention because he's always seen that particular dad. So then all of a sudden, as they go on a hike, he noticed that another dad comes along, and then his friend calls both of them dads. Clearly piques my son's interest. He's like, damn, hold on, that's your dad. How is that your dad? So then he comes back after, be gone 3 or 4 hours, and he says, Dad, how is it possible to have two dads? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, my friend we just went with, I forget his name. He says, he called two men his dads. I know his dad, but I didn't know his other dad. And I already kind of knew this, because I've seen both of them at the school. So I go, listen, you're going to see people at the school, some of your friends who are going to have a mom and a dad. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have a mom. But I didn't want to go into that detail. But I said, things happen, people change, and there's going to be a lot of parents where you're going to see a dad and a dad, a mom and a mom, and a mom and a dad. And a lot of times you may just see a dad or a mom as a single parent. So I said, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a lot of times the mom or the dad is usually absent, or people's feelings change towards their relationship and they move on. So then he goes, what do you mean? Clearly. So I'm like, well, a lot of times a man will start off with a woman or vice versa. But if they're unhappy, sometimes inside they want to make themselves happy. And a lot of times they're happier with the same sex than they are with the opposite sex. So because of this, they will actually go out and be with the same sex as a partner. And he goes, is that okay? I said, it was not easily practiced decades ago, and it was kept quiet for a very long time. But I said, now for the most part, it's usually accepted throughout most of the United States and the world. But a lot of people do not like that. So this is a small group of people similar to, I didn't want to bring in like race or anything like that, but I was like, it's kind of similar to some of the things that you guys talk about with the African American community. I was like, it's not a lot. You only see 20 Black people at your particular school. So but this is not the case. It's not a race, So I said, but the community is very small, but it's growing and growing and growing. But they do have people who really do hate them for no apparent reason other than them being what they call gay and what they call a lesbian or anything like that. So then he understood it because that's not his only friend. He has like 6 friends who has 2 dads. He has 2 friends that has 2 moms. So after going on these play dates with them, the conversation got less and less because it's like, oh, this is normal. You know what I mean? But it's good for me to have that conversation. It was great for me to have that conversation with him early on, being that he was only in the 3rd grade, and they treated him so well that it literally just went in. It was like, oh, okay, it's normal. You know what I mean? But me growing up, I never ever saw that as a 3rd grader. I never saw that from K through college. I never saw that. I never had friends who had gay parents. I never had none of that. You know what I mean? I didn't see any of that until I came from my small town to the Bay Area. And then I started to see stuff like that. And then it was still kind of like not normal to me, but I kept quiet because you don't want to offend anyone. Now you can't, no matter what, the smallest thing to where you thinking you just joking or being sarcastic, that can offend somebody. You lose your job. It can go in all kind of other directions. So I just make sure I keep it to myself. But being in San Francisco, it's normal, man. It's so normal now that I don't even think about it because they're all still good people. And that conversation is being talked about at an earlier age. They've been studying that in kindergarten, in 1st grade, at my kids' school. So the school is actually helping me conversate to my kids about it because they're making it somewhat of a curriculum, a small amount of a curriculum, but it's happening here. Why? Because you got to say San Francisco and Atlanta is probably 2 of the largest, and probably DC is probably 2 of the largest gay communities in the United States. It was basically it was bound to happen at some point. And I don't know how long this has been going on, but my daughter who started 1st grade, no, she actually started in kindergarten there last year. They started talking about it this year. So I think they start that at an early age. And then by the 4th, that's when they start bringing sex into the conversation and going from there. To me personally, that helps me, conversate, because if I'm going back to when my childhood, I don't remember talking about sex with my classmates or my teachers till maybe middle school.
5th grade for me.
That's a maybe. That's you talk 5th to 6th grade.
5th grade for me.
So
but how detailed were those conversations? You said 5th grade. Like, how detailed was that lesson?
Well, actually, it was pretty detailed. We had a video and everything. It showed the penis, it showed the vagina, it showed how intercourse happens, how a baby's made. They didn't necessarily show them having sex, but it showed, like, penis goes in here. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was pretty detailed. Obviously, we had to get approval back then to be able to watch it, but and it might have even been 4th grade. I'm trying to remember which hallway I was in, I think. But yeah, definitely 4th and 5th grade. And we had that conversation. We had it. They showed the video. I was in Oklahoma at the time in Fort Sill. So, around the military post. So I remember it. I mean, but me and my parents had the conversation already prior to. So
how old were you when you had that conversation? When your parents had that conversation with you?
Obviously, it was before that. I couldn't give you exact. But I think we had it though, because I'm the oldest and I have a sister who's 2 years younger than the little brother. So when you introducing, when you got boys and girls in your home, you know what I'm saying? We're in the bath, taking baths together as little kids. And, what's that? Oh, that's your sister. She's different. She got a vagina. You have a penis. You know what I'm saying? Like, those conversations happened early on, and hey, she's gonna have boobs and you're not, and why do we look different, and why is her, you know what I'm saying? Like, we had those conversations just early because I was exposed to my sister, seeing my sister naked and her seeing me naked, and my little, you know what I'm saying, in those family environments a lot earlier. So it's kind of the same for my daughter. We haven't necessarily sat down and had the birds and bees and all of that, but she knows to call her vagina a vagina. It's a vagina. Your brother has a penis. You know what I'm saying? So nobody gives it a special name. You need to, yeah, it's your little stuff. No, you need to call it what you call it, so they can understand. If ever some pedophile or some dude try to come up, or, to my son, somebody ever try to come up and say, hey, let me touch this, and oh, it's okay. No, I know what that is. That's what this is. That's nobody's supposed to touch, see, or any of that. You know what I'm saying? So, we had those conversations early on because, for my daughter, I didn't want her sitting on a man's lap in the middle of his lap. You don't need to sit. You don't need to cross. You don't need to straddle a man's leg. You know what I'm saying? And you shouldn't be sitting in any man's lap outside of your dad and your grandfather's, right? Like sit on the side, sit next to him. You shouldn't be none of that. When you hug, you need to be careful because, you know, they're only so tall for, you know, for a little bit. So they're right in the vagina, the pubic place. Yeah, you're right there. So you just have to be careful. We had, you know, candid conversations. I never talked to her like she was a little kid. But we had those conversations like, hey, you got to be careful right there. Don't hit right here because of this. So,
what age did you start this conversation?
So for her, because she's not really a little girl. She's pretty big for her age. So we had them starting about 4. You know what I'm saying? 3 or 4 years old. I don't sit in the middle of anybody's lap. When she was able to remember things like what I told her last year and that conversation. So just having it. And then obviously once we had my son, she's old enough to ask, hey, what's that? You know what I'm saying? She's 4 years old. He's a newborn. She's almost 5. So she knows that, hey, that looks different than what I got. You know, what's that? Oh, that's his penis. You know what I'm saying? So we kept it real. So I really don't know when it's appropriate to have that in-depth conversation about sex, especially with her. I know it's definitely before middle school. I'll say that. So if you got I didn't tell you, I'm a youth pastor too. So we get the little ones in there. They don't understand. They try to act like they know everything, but they're naive to what sex is at that young age in middle school. I'd rather them hear from me as their parents that's going to tell them, hey, this is what sex is. This is what it's about, than hear it from, you know, the 8th grader in the locker room that messed around and saw porn. And now, you know, it taints my kid's image of what sex is really about, what it's all about. So I am definitely big on making sure my kids know at an earlier age, that, hey, this is what sex is. This is what it's about. This is what it's for. Sex is a result of this. You shouldn't just be doing it with whoever and all of those things. Virginity, like you talked about. I'm a firm believer in the earlier, the better, because kids are smarter than what we think they are.
That's funny you said that, Mike, because right before we started, that's what kept running across my mind. If the parent if they don't have that conversation with their kids, then they're going to eventually get that information from someone else. And that source is going to be so off and so wrong that it's like people, human beings pay. So when you get this from the 7th to 8th grader, that's kind of, let's say, heavily influenced or whatever, like this popular kid or whatnot, that's going to stick in your daughter's or your son's head way more than what. So, but if you had that conversation with them prior, it's not going to stick because they are already knowledgeable on that subject. So you always want to me, I feel like you need a race to be the first to inform your kids about certain things, even if you don't know everything about it. That way, when they hear from someone else, they're going to come directly back to you and be like, well, I just heard this.
Right.
And I just had that conversation. But if you don't be the first one to actually conversate about it, then they don't really know what else to go off of because you never had that. You never talked about it.
Yeah, there's such thing called the law of first mention.
Right.
So the first time I heard something, that's what I remember the most, right? And even if that information is wrong, I know later on that it's wrong. But the first time I heard it was so.
Right.
I agree wholeheartedly, man.
Same here.
Wholeheartedly.
Mike, quick question. Did you think it was beneficial that you had that conversation with your parents prior to you seeing that video they showed at school?
It definitely was, because I remember some of the kids in the classroom who now I know that they were exposed to sex earlier in a negative way, saying stuff. And I'm like, that's not true. You know what I'm saying? Or that's not what that's for. That's not true. I could play that back in my mind. Like, hey, my mom told me something completely different. So now I'm going to go check the source. And then I took it to my mom and she's able to tell me, hey, like we just talked about, nah, that's not true. Or, well, that's a perverted way of this and that. So it definitely opened my eyes and was like, oh shoot, people know more about this stuff than I do. Cause honestly, I was a sheltered kid. I wasn't thinking about no sex in 6th grade. I'm trying to play sports. I'm trying to go hoop. I'm trying to play football. I ain't worried about no girlfriend. None of that. You know, of course I had one just because it was the cool thing to do at the time. Right. And the only thing I wanted to do was hold her hand. You know what I'm saying? So, but because I was aware of what sex was and I knew the ramifications of it and what it was meant to do and produce, I wasn't interested in it, right? Not like that. It wasn't something that, that was so bad or so, hey, you should don't worry about sex. You shouldn't just be doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like my parents kind of explained it a little bit to where it kept me from being so interested that I wanted to just go behind their backs to figure out, you know, what the craze was about sex.
I'm thinking about my own childhood and when I actually got the conversation. I don't think I got the conversation until well after I started messing around with girls and everything else. It was a addition that my dad tried to, hey, let me talk to you about the birds and bees, Dad. I'm 13 years old. I don't even remember getting the whole sex ed until junior high. I know we got a full sex ed in junior high. I don't remember it in 5th grade.
Yeah, me neither. Me neither. And I never got it from my parents either.
Yeah, me neither. I don't remember it until junior high, and I never had the conversation with my parents.
System is because they know how to teach it in a way that they're around other people. You know, it could be I would rather them start that particular topic and then let me come in and actually add my 2 cents versus me starting that conversation, unless of course it's at a later date. But if you're going to be anywhere between the 3rd and the 5th grade, you just ask yourself, how are you going to start that conversation? How are you even going to make it interesting? You know what I mean? And then to talk to a 3rd or 4th grader about that. Me personally, I don't have a way of doing that right now. So I would rather it come from the school system. Now, if it came from someone else, clearly I'm going to intervene fast as I can. But if it came from the school system, I think the way they're going to introduce it, I can take over from there and actually go and really get into depth based on what they originally introduced. But me introducing it on my own, it's, unless I give it some serious thought on how I'm actually going to introduce that, it's going to be hard for most fathers because they don't even really know how to talk about it, unless you're someone like Mike to where it was introduced to you at an early age. Now you know exactly how to pinpoint everything and give those details in a way that's going to be embedded in the child's system and they're going to remember. I didn't have that conversation as a kid, so I don't know how to actually put that into play. If this is making sense, like I don't know, it wasn't introduced to me, so I don't know how to introduce it to someone else. Like I never was taught it, so I don't know how to teach it, but I do know how to talk about it. And those are 2 totally separate things. I could talk about it all day and I could try to teach it, but ultimately I can't teach something that I wasn't taught. You know what I mean? So it's a different, like I can be there and say, okay, don't do this, don't do that, because that's just talking about it, but you're really not teaching. It's just like knowing math, but then teaching math, 2 totally different things. You know, you as a 4th grader, your 4th grade teacher is going to be able to actually teach math so that the kid can understand it. This is why I get frustrated when I'm teaching my kids at home, even right now, because I don't know how to teach. So I'm trying to tell you what to do because 8 + 8 is 16. Why? Because it is. It's as simple as that. You just add 8 to 8. But there's other ways to do that to where they can be like, oh, now I get it. You know what I mean? You can actually put it into play. And I don't know how to do that. So that's why I say that. Like if I really was taught this, I would be able to teach it myself. You know what I mean? But I wasn't. So I would rather it come from the school system than let me kind of come in and actually be that substitute teacher. That's my best advice on that one.
So for me, because I am a teacher and I was taught, like he said, I'm definitely going to introduce it myself. Just because for one, I teach for a living, right? Right now I teach adults, but I have to be able to break something down to the simplest, to be able to, so a 4th grader can understand it. Right. So, my biggest thing is if I know something, because I teach, if I know something, I need to be able to tell my 4-year-old how to do it and him understand it. That way I know what I'm doing so I can get to the higher levels and be able to break it down even more. So for me, I'm going to introduce it myself. I will definitely push abstinence. I can tie it to spiritual. I can tie it to all sorts of things because I know that sex is such a powerful tool. It does 2 things in life. It creates and destroys. Right. It's like water. Water is so powerful that you get enough of it. It runs all of Las Vegas, but then you get too much of it it has that tsunami and it wipes out a whole city, right? It kills a country because it's so much water. Sex is the same way. It's beautiful. I think it's amazing. It creates life. It produces us. You know what I'm saying? We all came from it. And then it destroys lives too when people don't know how to, when you're not mature enough to handle it. So for me, I would definitely push abstinence more than anything else. So.
You, Fred?
Yeah, I think definitely I'm gonna be the one to introduce it before anyone else. Because I think if they hear from me first, then if they hear from someone else or they hear something that differs than what I have already told them, then they can come to me, you know, with more questions. So I think me introducing it first is probably what I will be doing to my future son, giving him that conversation and letting him hear it from me first in the home rather than from someone outside of the home.
Right,
and I agree with Joe about the double standard for girls and boys.
So it's different. So you
definitely different. Just because I have a daughter, I got to protect her, right? My son is more apt to protect himself. And, you know, I'm big on women's rights. I love women. I think they're strong. They're beautiful. They're all those things. But if a man wants to grab a woman, there's not much he can do in most cases, right? 90%, 95, 99% of cases where if I want to take you, I'm going to grab you because men are just naturally stronger and bigger than women. So that's why I think there's a double standard.
There's multiple things that I got going on in my head and fears that I have with my children and raising them. One of them being two black males in current day America, the whole racism thing in the background. My second biggest fear is the sexual exploitation of minors and just everything. Predators are out there, sexual predators. They're, you know, using the apps, websites. They're even using gaming platforms to try to lure kids in and take advantage of them. So for me, having the conversation earlier would be the way I go. I haven't had the in-depth one yet, but saying that, I think watching a lot of TV programs about, you know, predators that are going after our children kind of make me paranoid to try to beat them to the punch and say, hey, this is what to look out for. This is what it overall is. And go as deep as maybe not as full like STDs and everything else, but as far as the actual acts of the penis entering the vagina and then the penis entering the anus for homosexual intercourse. So then I can get them an idea of what to look out for potentially to protect themselves. To see and have those understandings without scarring them, right? Because you don't want to go down that far, but to give them enough information so that if there is anything that pops up, they can tell me and try to inform me, you know, if somebody else tries to take advantage of them. That makes sense?
Yeah.
I think we need to,
Definitely.
I think I need to arm them at least with information so that they're not out there flapping and ignorant that somebody's trying to really just take advantage of them and them not knowing what they're trying to do to them. Joe, you have any final words on the topic?
I think the earlier the better for sure. But I think at the earliest will probably be somewhere between the third and the fourth grade. I just don't see a reason to talk about this topic about sex to a first or second grader, whether it's a boy or a girl. So I do want that to be a takeaway. I think that's a little too early. 5, 6, and 7 years old is you can probably discuss it if you think you are able to actually communicate that to your child. I'm definitely not going to say not to do it. I just don't think that they're going to be able to retain that information at that early of an age. So just keep that in mind. You can teach your child what you choose. Those are your kids. However, you got to keep in mind at a certain age, they're not going to understand it. So the earliest I would say is roughly between the third and the fourth grade. And then I think this should be, it should always be an ongoing conversation that you have with your kids every single grade. So if it's every 6 months, if it's every year, whatever, the more you talk about it with your kids, the more understanding they're going to be as they get older. So whether you have a boy or a girl, whether you have a son or a daughter, I think the earlier you start and the more you talk about it, the easier it's going to be for everyone in your family, for you and your kids. If they know about something earlier and they can really understand it and it's coming from you and they actually love you, they respect you, then they'll listen. One thing I do want to say, and it's a little bit off topic, but you got to keep in mind is the way you do this. And we without me saying any names, we know people whose parents were a little bit aggressive with this conversation. And then soon as that particular female or that man went out on their own, what ended up happening? They got pregnant. Now, we all know this. I'm pretty sure you know someone who had a strict dad, whether it was a military dad, whether it's someone who was in a particular police force or what have you, and they were too strong on what they should not do as a woman or as a lady while they were kids. And then what ends up happening is as soon as they get that chance of freedom, they go off to college, they become pregnant. So you want to make sure that you have to do it in a way to where they're understanding it, but you're not being so aggressive that you're being mean with the conversation and that topic, because that can lead to things that it defeats the purpose of you even having that conversation in the first place, because as soon as they got out of the house, they became pregnant. You don't want that as a woman or as a boy. And this happens quite often. This happens all the time. This is it can be from someone who has grown up in churches and their parents was pastors and they became a little too strict. I know people like that. I also know people who parents were sheriffs or in the military and they were a little too strict. And then what ended up happening as soon as they got that chance to get away, and they got away and they did the exact opposite of what you told them to do. You don't want that. We saw it. And we saw that particular dad was a little too strict. And as soon as that girl ended up moving out of the dad's house, she ended up getting pregnant. So just you got those stories, you know what I mean? So please make sure as a father that you're not overdoing it. Don't overdo it. Don't drown it. Try to have that sweet spot. I'll leave it on that.
All right, Alfred, Mike, you guys got anything else?
Yeah, I agree with Joe too. I think the earlier the better. Also, I think having a conversation in your own household first would definitely make a difference. I don't know if I can say if there is a right age or grade to say that at, because I think it just varies, especially with these times. Like Joe said, his kids, they having it, super early compared to when he first even heard about it. So I think, me having a son, in 2020, it might even be earlier than that. So, who knows? It might have to be said earlier than I even want to have that conversation. But I definitely think it should come from the household first, and just kind of getting the gauge of your child. And, through conversation, if they have, any questions in regards to that, then you can kind of tell, from the conversation you have with them, if you need to have that conversation now or save it for later, or probably maybe introduce pieces of it. So that way you can kind of just introduce it to them first in that aspect.
Man, so I agree with y'all wholeheartedly. The earlier the better, for sure. You don't want to wait. I agree that before 7 is really, really, really too early to be talking about that. Just unless, and then too, you should take it case by case, because it depends on what your kids have been exposed to. You could have been around some teenage kid and showed them something, then you might have to go and explain a lot earlier than you want to. So, be very, very mindful about that. I echo Joe's sentiments about how you say it. What from my generation, for our generation, they made sex such a bad, or you shouldn't talk about that, or don't do it, do what I say, and made it such a a word, especially because I grew up in church. It was a word that we didn't necessarily use so much. So it made it, oh, you just shouldn't be doing it. So it made people like me, who was a PK, very interested, right? I want to go find out and I'm going to go do it. I'm going to go run towards it because you're not educating me on why I shouldn't be doing it. And it's something that you're so scared to talk about. So it's like, why is this? I thought it was such a beautiful thing, right? I mean, if we're Christians, God created sex. He told us to do that. Why aren't we talking about it? So just being able to have a conversation and not make it really, not such a big deal, meaning like it's a big deal, but not going to make it so taboo and so scary that my kids can't come ask me what sex is. And, oh my God, you're thinking about sex. You know what I'm saying? So, especially having a girl, you're like, shoot, I know somebody gonna be breaking her back someday. We just don't like to think about that as men. It's like, Jesus, come on, man. But I know that's the case, right? I know she's gonna be, she's gonna have somebody's baby someday, but I have to be willing to have those conversations and not make it so, oh my God, my daughter's talking about sex. And no, I think we should create an environment and an atmosphere in our homes where our kids feel safe and comfortable enough to come ask us about those things before they dive into something like that, and get themselves in trouble and out there getting pregnant right away and, some kind of disease, or end up in a position, they didn't know they was teasing a guy, or the girl was teasing them and they didn't know how to handle it. So they end up raping a girl. We just got to educate our kids, educate our children, because we love them enough to not want them in those positions. We don't, one thing my parents always told me, they'll never leave me unequipped for life. So that's what I want to make sure I pass on to my kids, especially when it comes to sex.
Absolutely. So I want to make sure I equip my boys with all the information readily available, that I can instill upon them, so that they're not out there willfully unprepared to face whatever that comes at them. So I think by maintaining those good lines of communication, they should be able to approach you with any question that they have about any subject without fear of judgment, per se. And I think by doing that, I could, with any topics, especially certain taboo subjects such as sex, we'll be able to meet somewhere in the middle ground and have that conversation, the bare minimum conversation, so that I feel that I have prepared them for anything that potential will come. At what age is appropriate? I think at least from 11 and up, you need to have some type of conversation about sex. At bare minimum, 11 years old, you need to have some type of conversation about sex, so that you are preparing your sons and your daughters, so that they're not willfully ignorant of what's to come. Because hormones start generating around 12 for girls. It's 11 right when, because they mature faster. You know what I mean? So you got that, you got that coming, Mike. So
Lord knows I'm scared.
Tell her Adonis still remembers her. So, so 11, 12, I think bare minimum, you need to have that conversation. And be adamant of answering any and all questions that they have, because by that time, I guarantee you, they have already some questions that are locked and loaded. So I think how far and how detailed is going to be per child. It's going to be different. If it's different, you're just going to have to gauge what you as a parent are willing to express and communicate, and keep those lines of communication open, and let them know that they can ask you anything in regards to this topic. It's not taboo, because if it's taboo, it's coveted, it's secretive, and they hold it in a different regard. But if you break all those barriers down and say, hey, you can ask me anything about this particular subject, and I'll give you the gist of what I believe it is, and make sure that you give them a level of comfort to come to you and ask those questions.
Today's dad quote, I got this information off of allprodad.com, titled Teaching Kids About Sex. It lays out 4 key components to discussing sex with your children. Number 1, Make sure you teach all the pertinent facts, to include everything from the birds and the bees mechanics to the threat of HIV to the way our culture has twisted healthy sexuality. Talk about the words like rape, harassment, and abuse. Be factual and truthful. Number 2, engage the topic of sexuality early and often. Make your conversation age appropriate, but do not wait until your child reaches puberty. Healthy sex education starts with toddlers, when you accurately name the body parts. As they get older, look for teachable moments when you can ask reasonable questions or express your perspective. Check in one-on-one to see if they have any questions or concerns. Make yourself available as a resource. Number 3, let them know that you have gone through your own struggles. This is definitely awkward, but nothing brings the sense of confidence and respect if you as a dad are willing to admit that yes, you did struggle with sexual self-control. You weren't perfect, but you've been there. Number 4, reinforce the beauty of sexual relationship in its proper expression. Tell your children the benefit of waiting until marriage to be sexually involved and the pitfalls they'll face if they don't wait. Article concludes, make it your goal to give your children a positive, wholesome view of sexuality. Just think of the blessing it will bring to them and their children for years to come. That concludes our episode today. Make sure you join our Facebook group, Brothers in Fatherhood. Follow us on Instagram, Brothers in Fatherhood, and on Twitter at Bros in Fatherhood. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Brothers in Fatherhood. Thanks for listening to Brothers in Fatherhood podcast. Before we go, show some love for your new favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Then stay tuned for next week where we'll discuss your children and technology. How much is too much? When should you introduce your kids to technology, i.e. the internet, smartphones / tablets, social media, video games, and online gaming? We would love to hear from you. Drop the Brotherhood a line. If you have a subject you want us to tackle or you just want your voice to be heard, please send questions and comments to brothers@brothersinfatherhood@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Stay safe.